It's autumn, it's autumn, all the leaves are brown.
Hello, and welcome to the craft shop staff. My name is Kenna, and I'll be teaching you inkle weaving. A little bit of background knowledge. It's around a 17th century craft brought over from French voyagers and Norwegian fur traders. It's a warp face weave, and the shed is created manually by raising and lowering some of the weave. And most of them are held in place by heddles on this loom called an Inkle loom. Staff will instruct guests on how to make a 3-feet weave for guests, and they can turn it into whatever they would like. Things can be turned into a lanyard, guitar strap, purse strap, headband, bracelet, ankle, and ultimately they can turn it into whatever they'd like. Before we get started, we're first going to learn some terms that you need to know before you are able to teach. First off, obviously, this is your end product and it's your weave. This is your Inkle loom, and this is your shuttle. The shuttle is the main tool used to make the weave itself. Before you make the weave itself, though, you're going to what's called warping the loom, and that's getting all these strings on the pegs that they need to get on in order to make the weave later. While you're warping the loom, you'll be making two types of warps. One's called a heddle warp, where you bring the warp up here and go around and down, and you use a heddle, which is a string right here, to anchor it down. I'll also be going over how to actually warp the loom like that when I get to warping the loom, but just as far as terms right now, this is a heddle warp, and then this is an open warp. An open warp comes from the tension peg right here. This is the tension peg that you'll be adjusting with tension. And an open warp comes from the tension peg and goes through here like such and then around the pegs. So those are the two types of warps you'll need to know. Like I said, this is the shed that is created by the two different types of warps. This is the heddle, this is the loom, this is the shuttle, and then you also need to know what the pattern sheet looks like. This is our pattern sheet. This is the pattern that they can decide to do. And based off of this pattern, this is the master copy. So the teeny little red dot means that's where the red yarn is. So you're going to have an open warp with red, a heddle warp with red, an open warp with red, and then you'll move into the next color. The next color is blue, as seen in the pattern. So blue heddle, blue open, and then they move to yellow, as designed by the symbol. So when we give these to guests, they're blank right here, and they can fill in their own colors, and then they'll know that the dot equals purple. So they would be doing a purple open heddle, or a purple open warp, a purple heddle warp, a purple open warp, and then let's say they keep it blue, but then they do green here, so the heart would equal a green warp or green weave. Alright, so we're going to get started with helping our guests to weave, and the first thing that you're always going to want to have them do is pick out their pattern and give them their pattern worksheet, have them write in their colors, and that way they're able to follow along as you're teaching them how to start, and then it's also just easier so they don't get lost in their pattern later on. Another thing to point out to them is that certain patterns limit the amount of colors they can use and the width that their weave will end up being. So just make sure that they're aware of this before they pick out their pattern and before they start. Also, it's an important thing to remember that while you're warping, you're always going back and forth between an open warp and a heddle warp. Always back and forth. Always a heddle to an open to a heddle to an open. And encourage the guests to mark off on their pattern sheet as they finish a warp. That way, like I said, they won't be getting lost. Alright, so we're going to start with our first color, which for my pattern is blue, and we're going to tie it on. We're going to tie it on the tension peg, and you can do a square knot, or just a fisherman's knot, or 3 knots, whatever you know of those 3. Basically, it's just like tying a knot in your shoe, but you want to do it 3 times so that you don't end up tying a slip knot like where it can move around. So 3 knots, a fisherman knot, whatever. You want about an inch in between the tension peg and the knot, which just adds to make things easier later on. So to start my pattern, I have an open weave. So I'm just going to take my string, and remember, an open weave is where you go between these 2 main pegs, and you're going to go up and around. And for a 3 feet weave, we don't hit these pegs right here, we just go on the main outside ones. So we go up to this peg, down to the bottom, and then underneath all of them, and back to the tension peg. You can pull it over. And then I know that my next color is blue, and that my next warp is going to be a heddle warp. So I'm going to take my string and go up to the heddle peg, and then follow along on the bottom, just like so, and then stop right here. And whenever you're done with the color, you can always just take a little bit of extra string, wrap it up, and then tuck it behind the main loom right here, and kind of keep tension on the string but not too tight. Then I'm going to grab a heddle from my heddle basket, which is just this string right here. I'll take it and loop it once on the bottom heddle peg, and then come up, wrap it around the heddle string, and tuck it under. So right now it looks like these 2 are matched, but if you see, you can already kind of start to see the shed getting created by going down and up. So say you get to a point where you're ready to switch to your next color. I've done an open heddle on blue. I've done an open warp on blue, a heddle warp, an open warp, a heddle warp, an open warp, and now it's time for me to switch to my next color. You can just take your blue and wrap it around this back side, making sure that the tension on the string stays pretty good. You don't want it super tight where your string's gonna break or you'll have to start all over, but just enough where there's some bounce back. Then you'll tie the yellow string on the same way you tie on the blue. So like I said, just 3 knots, or a fisherman's knot or square knot. You just want to make sure that things aren't going to move around. And so, because I know I just did an open warp, I'm going to go do a heddle warp. And then grab my heddle itself and go around that bottom heddle peg to the back side of it, and then up, over, and back down that heddle peg. This is, I know it's done. Something to pay attention to once you're going back and forth between colors is down here, you'll see, and especially the guests will notice, that the strings are going to start to get twisted around each other and kind of look disastrous. But it's alright, because when it comes to the weaving process, there's about I would say a solid 7 inches from the tension peg to where the heddles are of weave that doesn't get used. And that's where all of those twisted and ugly looking strings end up being. So it's all right. So I finished my heddle warp. I'm going to go to an open warp. Making sure if I was doing a pattern with a guest that I would be having them mark off on their pattern where they are. And then if I switch back to blue right now, I'm just going to tie this up. You can even leave it right here, grab the blue, and go back to warping. So the tying off process is probably the hardest part of doing an inkle weave. Say the guest is to the very end of their project and they are ready to start weaving. First we need to get rid of this spool of string, and in order to do that we need to tie it off back to the very beginning where my first knot is. So what you do is you can just shift over all these other guys and single out the beginning tie on. And what you're going to do is take the end and give yourself a solid 6 to 7 inches of string. And you're going to tie it to the string itself. So you're going to take the tie off knot and cut the top string like so, because you're going to tie together these two pieces right by the tie off knot basically. You want to do it 2 to 3 times just so you're not getting that slip knot as always. You can go more than 3 also. So I just tied it to the same knot. So that's also the tie off knot and the tie on knot. But now the blue string is just all one big continuous circle because it's all tied together. So the blue is done. So then I'm just going to go over to the yellow and single out that tie on right here. Take the spool, give myself some extra string. And cut the bottom so that I can tie the knots together. Again, making sure that there's just not a slip knot thing that's going on right now. So you can almost even grab under the other strings and tie. There we go. Also, when you're tying off, you want to make sure that the tension in the string is pretty tight so you still have that bounce back. So my strings are all tied on now. So before you begin the weaving process, you get to use the shuttle. And what you do for that is you're just gonna load it up with the outside color that you have on your pattern. So for me it's blue. Guests can choose to do a different color, but I just think it looks more clean if you use the same color that your border color is. So this person used white and their border color is white. We just highly recommend it to have it like that. If they're doing a smaller pattern, you want to tell them to wrap their shuttle about 40 times. So 1, 2, 3, every time getting to the top is a wrap. Because I'm just doing this as a sample, I'm only going to do a little bit. But for the thicker patterns, you want to tell them to do it about 60 to 80 times, and for the thinner ones, like I said, about 40 times you're going to wrap the shuttle. If there's any extra string on the shuttle at the end of their weave, that's what you can use to make those extra heddles by tying it around this top heddle peg and this bottom peg. Alright, so now we're going to begin the weaving process. Remember that our shed is made by bringing these open strings up and down while we're weaving. So to start it, you just bring this in, leave the string in. I had the shed up, now I'm going to bring the shed down. And the beginning can't get very tight just because it's the beginning, but you just keep going back and forth between the shed being up and down. Alright, so as you can tell, this guest has already started weaving, and their pattern has started coming through. They are just going, again, up and down between. Something to notice when you're weaving is that when I go down, you'll see that the strings are getting caught on each other. That means that's the weave that I'm on. So I'm going to stick my shuttle in, pull down these guys, and actually it was wrong, but you'll see that the string was already in there. So now I'm going to go up, and the string is sticking together. You're going to pull this down, and then pull this through. Make sure it's nice. You kind of want to guide it through on the side so that you don't get big loops. And now I'm going to go down. Back to up. Down. Pulling that extra string through. And then let's say I weave all the way up to here and my shed is getting really, really small. That's where the tension peg comes in. You can loosen it and pull on your weave and kind of move your heddle strings up on the strings. And then take your tension peg back, tighten it back up, and then you have more string to weave with. You'll notice this guest kind of has like not super defined lines here. That just means they're not really using their shuttle to really push their weave down. I highly suggest you do that. It's okay if not. It obviously looks very good still. But as you see, the more I go, the lines get a little bit cleaner and a little bit thinner, more tight. Say the guests finish all their open string and is ready to cut off their weave. All you do is take a pair of scissors, and the only thing that's going to be left unwoven of your weave is going to be from about here, or until you can't weave anymore, to about the heddles. This weave will eventually come all the way up to about here, but then your string, or no, it'll come to about right here, but your string won't be able to split anymore. So you can just cut it right by the heddles. All the heddles will fall off and you can reuse them. And then all you do with the string, so that your weave doesn't look like this, is you can put some nail polish up at the top to really fuse the strings together, or you can spend the time just tying 2 strings together and tying it off. You can also just have guests tell them to tuck it like this and then sew right here. Whatever the guest prefers, really. They can also leave the strings long, and it's very unlikely to unweave. They can also just cut the extra string from the shuttle, and they're good to go.